Let's introduce our next speaker. He is Congressman Chris Van Hollen. He was elected to Congress from the state of Maryland in 2002 after more than a decade in that state's House of Delegates and State Senate. Since arriving in Congress, he has moved swiftly up the Democratic ranks. Until earlier this year, he had spent 4 years as chairman of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee. In his role as ranking member of House Budget, he has been a pivotal figure on fiscal issues. Last year, he served on the Joint Select Committee on Deficit Reduction, also known as a super committee. This year, he spearheaded a House Democratic budget proposal designed to draw clear distinctions with the Republican approach. Few know the politics and the policy of deficit reduction as well as Congressman Van Hollen. Let's welcome him.
Thank you, Judy. Thank you. Well, thank you, Judy, for that introduction. I also want to thank the Peterson Foundation for organizing this gathering and for the very important work it does in raising awareness throughout the country about the fiscal challenges that we face in the United States of America. Let me begin on a point of agreement with Paul Ryan, and that is that we must act now to put in place a plan to reduce our long-term deficits and rising debt. The question is not whether we need to have such a plan. The question is how that plan works. And that's where the difference lies. I think we all understand that to govern is to choose, and that our budgets reflect our values and our priorities as a country. Democrats have advanced two major principles in taking on the budget challenge. First, we should do nothing to hurt our very fragile economic recovery. In fact, we believe there are additional measures we can take now to further boost job growth. Second, we believe we have to reduce our deficit in a steady, credible, and balanced way. And by balanced, we mean a combination of spending cuts and reforms over time and revenues generated by ending tax loopholes and tax breaks that disproportionately benefit the very wealthy. We believe in a plan of shared responsibility and shared prosperity. Now, on both these two fronts, we're in very good company. Every bipartisan group that has looked at our budget challenge has warned that deep, immediate cuts would slow economic growth. The chairman of the Federal Reserve has repeatedly issued similar warnings. Still, last year, our Republican colleagues on the Joint Economic Committee issued their prescription. It was cut and grow. Well, that is the failed prescription adopted by many of our European friends who have seen their economies weaken and slow. Fortunately, here in the United States, the President and the previous Congress enacted a number of measures, including the American Recovery and Reinvestment Act, which helped stop the economic free fall, turn the corner, and has helped put over 4 million Americans back to work with 26 consecutive months of positive private sector job growth. In fact, the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has indicated that the recovery bill helped to save or create up to 4 million jobs. Now, clearly we have a long way to go in terms of our economic recovery. That's why the Congress should enact the jobs initiative that the President put forward that has now been sitting in the House of Representatives since last September, including a major new investment in our national infrastructure. The Republican budget, the House Republican budget on this point, would actually cut our current transportation spending by almost 50% next year. Now, I think we all agree that we have huge unmet infrastructure needs in this country. We also have over 16% unemployment in the construction industry. It simply doesn't make sense to have that kind of deep cut, especially when the Congressional Budget Office estimates that about 1/3 of our current year deficit is as a result of underemployment, the fact that the economy remains somewhat weak. In addition to including the President's jobs proposal in the Democratic alternative budget that we put forward in the House, we adopt the bipartisan and balanced framework, put forward like groups like Simpson-Bowles, Rivlin-Domenici, and other groups. Now, I should be clear that that doesn't mean that I or probably anybody else necessarily endorses every specific recommendation that they've put forward. But I do support their starting point and their baseline and their ratio of cuts to revenue. And I would remind everybody here that as part of the Budget Control Act, which the Congress passed last August, we cut $1 trillion through putting caps on spending over the next 10 years. So that was 100% on the cutting side. And the President's plan, as well as the Democratic alternative budget in the House, will reduce our deficits to below 3% of GDP by the year 2015 and put our debt to GDP ratio on a stabilized basis at the end of the decade. Now, our Republican colleagues have totally rejected the balanced approach recommended by these bipartisan groups. Totally. 98% of my House Republican colleagues have signed a pledge, the Norquist Pledge, that prohibits 1 cent from closing a tax loophole or eliminating a tax subsidy from going to deficit reduction. So I want to emphasize that point because we hear a lot of talk about tax reform, and we'd all like to work together on tax reform. But there's a major difference between the way our Republican colleagues talk about tax reform and the way Simpson-Bowles talks about tax reform, because Simpson-Bowles takes a good portion of revenue from that process for the purpose of deficit reduction, and not a single Republican proposal or plan or budget does that. And it was that refusal to take a balanced approach that made it very difficult to move forward, first in the Biden group and later in the so-called super committee, both panels that I served on. And I felt it was a big missed opportunity. It's also worth noting that the last time we had a balanced budget was under President Clinton before the 2001-2003 tax cuts. And by the way, the economy was booming under President Clinton, and we know that the tax cuts have not led to long-term economic growth. Now, the budget math is pretty simple. If you refuse from the outset to ask the wealthiest Americans to contribute more for deficit reduction, then your budget has to hit everyone and everything else harder. That's just simple math. And as we look at the Republican plan, with its additional tax cuts that disproportionately benefit folks at the very top, it's a great path to prosperity if you've already made it. But for everybody else, it's a path to austerity, and it doesn't serve the interests of this country. That reality just played out last week in the House of Representatives, because our Republican colleagues stated that the across-the-board cuts scheduled to begin January 2nd of next year would harm our defense spending. Democrats agreed that the Meat Act's approach that is spelled out in the sequester is the wrong way to go. In fact, our alternative budget eliminated the sequester for the full 10 years and replaced it with a balanced approach toward deficit reduction. But we nevertheless went ahead last week and put forward our own one-year alternative to prevent the sequester. The Republican plan in the area of the Agriculture Committee decided to take almost 100% of the cuts from food nutrition programs. I heard my friend Paul Ryan here talk about how everyone eligible for the program would continue to get it. The reality is that the nonpartisan Congressional Budget Office has said that those cuts will result in 22 million American children getting less support under food nutrition programs. 300,000 kids would lose access to the school lunch program. That's not my figures, those are the Congressional Budget Office figures. We put forward a plan that also cut in the agricultural area. We cut the direct payments that are unjustifiable to various agribusiness interests around the country. We also said that we should get rid of the subsidies for the biggest oil companies. So we took a more balanced approach. Unfortunately, our Republican colleagues rejected that balanced approach because at the end of the day, despite all the talk about making sure they protected defense spending, they were more interested in protecting some of these tax breaks than they were in the defense part of the budget. Now, let me just say something about health care costs, because all of us know that the retirement of the baby boomers and increasing health care costs are big drivers of our deficits, more in the second 10 years than the current 10, but they are certainly driving a lot of the spending. Democrats and Republicans have proposed fundamentally different approaches to this challenge. The Democrats have begun with the fact that the per capita cost increases in Medicare are actually slightly below the per capita cost increases in the private insurance market. And in Medicaid, those per capita cost increases are lower. So we do oppose plans like the Republican voucher plan, which simply shifts the burden of those rising costs onto seniors on Medicare, whose median income is below $22,000. Instead, we have proposed to modernize the payment systems in Medicare and Medicaid to reward the value of care over the volume of care, to reward quality over quantity. The Affordable Care Act began that process with reforms like the accountable care organizations that move away from a fee-for-service system that has resulted in overutilization. We should accelerate those efforts, and there are proposals to do so. The United States spends almost 18% of our GDP on health care, far more than any other industrialized nation, and without measurably better results in many key areas. We can do better, and we can do it better without simply shifting those risks. Let me just end by saying that we all know that we're facing this very combustible mix of fiscal challenges at the end of this year. And I believe that the bipartisan frameworks that have been put forward by various commissions and groups offer a way out if we're willing to have a dialogue and conversation and partnership around those frameworks. Everyone's going to have to make some tough decisions and tough compromises. I do not believe that this election is going to render a huge verdict on the way forward. It may provide some guidance tilting one way or another, but the reality is at the end of the day, people are going to have to make those tough decisions. And in that regard, I have to say that the remarks that were made, already released, leaked by Speaker Boehner, that says that they're going to insist penny for penny on cutting the budget in exchange for another increase in the debt ceiling, in my view, goes in the category of trying to draw lines in the sand rather than trying to reach compromise. And as an economic and fiscal matter, it is absolutely reckless to threaten that the United States will not pay its bills. It is reckless to do that. That is not fiscal discipline. That is fiscal irresponsibility. We should be coming together to try and find a way out, not drawing lines in the sand. And I will just end by pointing out that even if we adopted today the House Republican budget, we all voted for it, yes, that you would have to raise the debt ceiling by $5.2 trillion between now and the end of 10 years. So their own budget would not meet the standards that are laid down by the Speaker. So we need to be serious about this problem. We need to come together in a bipartisan way. Those groups that I mentioned have at least provided a framework for approaching it. I hope we can get to work sooner rather than later. Thank you.
Good to see you.
Good to see you.
Congressman Van Hollen, thank you very much. I just want to start out with the same two questions that I posed to Chairman Ryan, and that is, this clearly can't all be figured out in this session right now. There's election underway. What are the odds that a lame duck session with, I don't know how many weeks there would be after the election before the end of the year to figure out the budget, sequestration, and the end of the Bush tax cuts? What are the odds?
Well, let me start by saying, Judy, I regretfully agree with you that the chances of getting a big agreement between now and the election are pretty remote, and that does take us into the lame duck session. Having served on the super committee and looked at just how difficult sorting through a lot of these very important issues would be, it's hard for me to see how you resolve it in a lame duck session. That doesn't mean that a lame duck session cannot be constructively used. In fact, we should be using some of our time right now to have this conversation. But that doesn't mean it can't be used to try and structure a framework in which these decisions would be made in the months beginning in January. So some things have to be done in a lame duck session to prevent some of these big fiscal cliffs. I would hope that would force some very positive action as opposed to result in sort of a explosion of that fiscal cocktail.
Well, it sounds like you and Chairman Ryan may be in agreement on that there needs to be some framework. There's been, as I mentioned, there's some conversation about the president proposing a 6-month extension or something like that. Is that in conversation or not?
I don't know of any conversation
Okay.
where the president would propose a 6-month extension. You could envision a number of extensions. I should underscore the fact that we should not continue to kick the ball down the road. So the danger with certainly too many extensions is just that. You begin to release the pressure that currently exists to force what I would hope would be productive action. But given the fact that I don't think we can resolve everything in a lame duck session, I think there would likely be some interim agreements, but they need to be structured so that we move forward on the big issues.
To listen to what Chairman Ryan said and what you're saying just now, it sounds as if the two sides, not only are not any closer, but may even be farther apart than you were when all this was discussed the last time. How do you see that?
Well, I don't know if we're farther apart, but I do think we haven't seen much movement on some of these important areas. And look, I go back to the fact that we have bipartisan commissions that at least have provided a framework, a model. And if you look at their ratio of revenues to cuts, they do more in cuts than in revenue. And many of us on the Democratic side have embraced that approach. And as I said, we already did $1 trillion in cuts as part of the Budget Control Act. But when we put on the floor of the House last week a proposal that included cuts but also revenue to prevent the sequester from taking place for a year, we actually didn't even get a vote on it. But it was pretty clear that our Republican colleagues rejected that. And so I think a very important question is, how are we going to get around this pledge, this refusal,
Right.
to raise 1 penny? I mean, 1 penny in revenue for the purpose of reducing the deficit. Because if you come to the conversation with that position, you cannot possibly end up with a balanced approach if you insist on that, which is what's happened today.
Medicare, we could pick out a lot of different parts of the Ryan budget and what else is on the table. But Democrats and you, among others, have basically said that his proposal on Medicare would end what we know as Medicare. And yet it wouldn't affect anybody over the age of 55. It is the same proposal in large part, as we just heard from Chairman Ryan, as Senator Ron Wyden, liberal Democrat of Oregon, is talking about. So aren't some of these charges about ending Medicare as we know it disingenuous?
No, what I've said is that it would end the current Medicare guarantee. I've been very careful not to say it would end Medicare. It would radically change it, and it would end the Medicare guarantee, and this is how it would do it. Currently, under Medicare, you're assured a certain amount of support from the Medicare program to meet your health needs. The way they save money in the Medicare program is to delink the rising costs in health care from the amount of the voucher that you will get. So what that means is if you're a senior, you're going to have to bear all the risks of those costs. And let me just make this point. That's a much worse deal than members of Congress give themselves. Under the Federal Employee Health Benefit Plan, even as costs rise, the federal government, the health plan, puts in about 72%. If health care costs double, you still get 72%. Under the House Republican Medicare voucher plan, they save money by delinking the two. The reason they save Medicare money is because health care costs continue to rise, and yet the senior gets a voucher that relative to that goes down, which is why what we've said is we have an awful lot, we spend 18% of GDP on our healthcare system. We know that the fee-for-service system has created overutilization. There's no doubt about that. We began under the Affordable Care Act to take some steps to change that, including the accountable care organizations. There's more that needs to be done. There are lots of there are misaligned incentives between Medicare and Medicaid. There's a lot more to be done. You don't have to shift all the burden and risks to seniors.
different subject. For all the differences that you and the White House are talking, you are really focusing on deficit reduction. I mean, that's become the conversation. All around the world, politicians who espoused austerity, Greece, France, Germany in particular in their local elections, are being thrown out of office. Why aren't American Democrats equally vulnerable to the extent that this president's in power? Because that's where the conversation is in this country.
Well, gee, I made very clear in my remarks that our number one priority was to make sure we have job creation. I said the Democrats' approach to the budget is based on two principles. The very first one is not only do no harm, but we can take additional measures to help encourage job growth. And the president has a plan. It's been sitting in the House of Representatives since September that would increase economic activity and job growth, including a major infrastructure proposal. We have that in our Democratic alternative budget. That is an absolute priority because, as I said, the Congressional Budget Office has said that 1/3 of our current deficit problem is because there are too many people out of work. So absolutely, our priority has been to get people back to work. And I mentioned the Republican Joint Economic Committee report, Cut and Grow. That was the same prescription that a lot of European countries have taken. And it was a failed approach there. It would have been a failed approach here. Fortunately, at the critical moment, we were able to pass the economic recovery bill, which did stop the free fall and turn the corner.
Another comment that came out, and this is with all due respect to the Peterson Institute, but Robert Kuttner, who's a well-known liberal economics writer, says that Democrats like you, by participating in forums like this one, that is all focused on austerity, cutting the deficit, cutting the debt, that you really become almost window dressing for a conservative agenda that's anti-jobs, anti-recovery, and wrong-headed economics.
Well, look, there may be some people, I'm not referring to any people, who want to put their head in the sand with respect to our long-term deficit challenge. We have one in this country, and we need to deal with it, but we need to deal with it in a smart way. And in fact, the House Republican budget is the opposite of this austerity approach. We are focused on pro-growth and in a very balanced approach to deficit reduction over a period of time. You have to do it in a credible, predictable way. In fact, the proposal we put forward, as I said, accommodates the president's jobs plan, and we deal with the deficit issue in a balanced way with the kind of framework and the kind of ratios proposed by bipartisan groups.
All right, 3 very quick questions. We've got less than 2 minutes, so I'm going to try to be brief, and I would ask you. This comes from Facebook, from a man named Russ Wilcox in Massachusetts. He said, in a democracy, can we ever truly expect a majority of voters to prefer taxation or austerity over deficits? And if not, do we need a constitutional amendment to require a balanced budget?
Well, I do not think a constitutional amendment to balance the budget is the right way to go, because what it does is locks you into a particular course and doesn't allow you to deal with changing events. For example, great recessions or depressions. I mean, there are times when you want to make sure that you have the flexibility at the federal level to help boost the economy and run short-term deficits. The key, though, is to not allow that to get out of control and to have the debts ever increasing, which is why we put forward a balanced approach to turn the corner and bring them down and stabilize the debt and maintain those critical investments in our education, in our infrastructure, in science and research, which we have to do if we're going to remain competitive in this century.
2 other quick questions. One is a lot of attention, as you know, right now on the Robert Caro book, the 4th in a series on Lyndon Johnson, the master tactician, how he got hugely controversial issues like civil rights, Medicare through Congress when he was president. If LBJ were president today, do you think that these issues would be resolved or that we'd be much farther along if we had a leader like Lyndon Johnson?
I think the president has been doing an extraordinary job under very, very tough circumstances. And the reality is that the president put forward last summer a balanced plan. I know he did. I know a lot of the details that they put forward. They were willing to make some tough decisions, but what they're not willing to do is apply an austerity approach, which will slow down the economy. And what we will all insist on when it comes to the deficit reduction path is that it be balanced. We cannot have a system where we continue to provide another round of tax cuts to folks at the very, very top, which only increases the deficit and has not, and the evidence is pretty clear, it did nothing to boost long-term economic growth. That's a failed strategy. Why would we want to go back to that? So no, I think the president has put forward a very reasonable plan to address this issue. As Paul said, this will be central to the debate in the campaign this fall. I just hope that when those campaigns are over, we're able to put together the pieces in a productive way, because we have to deal with this as a country.
Final question. If there is this sort of fiscal crisis, if that's what you're facing, what is wrong with the simple idea, relatively simple idea, espoused by former Fed Chairman Alan Greenspan, New York City Mayor Michael Bloomberg, just let all the tax cuts expire?
Well, I think, as the chairman of the Federal Reserve has said, that if you create that kind of total fiscal cliff, it would be a drag on the economy. I mean, you're talking about $5 trillion over 10 years, and there are lots of those tax provisions that help middle-income Americans that lots of us would like to see extended. However, you make a very important point, and that's why I think that there is some possibility of a productive outcome. Simpson-Bowles proposed about $2 trillion in additional revenue. And if you allow all the tax cuts to expire, that amounts to about $5 trillion in additional revenue. I would hope that some of our Republican colleagues would agree that something in the range of $2 trillion is better than $5 trillion, because $5 trillion is what you get if you just adhere to the current law. In other words, if Congress were to pack its bags today and not come back until this time next year, you would have overachieved the Simpson-Bowles target from a perspective of deficit reduction. Now, that's not the way we want to do it. There are better ways to do it, just like there are much better ways of dealing with the sequester, much more responsible ways. But these should produce a willingness to come to the table. I certainly hope so. Unfortunately, that key question of balance has so far been missing from the conversation when we sit down with our Republican colleagues.
Well, I'm sure we all have confidence that between you and Chairman Ryan, you're going to figure it all out. Thank you, Congressman Van Hollen. Thank you very much. It's good to see you.
Likewise.
Thank you, Chris. I appreciate it. Thank you. Good to see you.